the licensing fee that I contribute doesn't actually go to the artists that I listen to. And that's the fundamental problem.
Jordan, what's up, man? How are you feeling?
I'm good, Sam. How you doing?
I'm good. And I'm very excited about this episode. We got a special guest from just across the pond over in London, UK, Mr. Anton Gorman, the Global Director of Communications at Deezer. Deezer is one of the world's biggest audio and music streaming platforms. They're more well-known in Europe, but are gaining incredible traction worldwide with over 16 million active users in 180 plus countries. In this episode, I really enjoyed being able to dive into Anton's strategy as it pertains to approaching effective communication strategy as a means to drive growth for a company like Deezer. But we also get to speak about some of the initiatives that Deezer is spearheading, such as what I would honestly consider to be their groundbreaking UCPS initiative. UCPS stands for User-centric payment system. And I think this can literally transform artist and label payments to ensure that the money you pay actually goes towards supporting the artists you listen to. So I think they got some really unique innovations to speak to. Jordan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think when I think about a story, I usually think about it from the perspective of an artist communicating that to their community or to their fan base. But Anton is attracted to stories for a business. So I'm not sure a lot of our audience has really thought about it. I know I haven't thought about it from the perspective that he comes from. So just speaking about creating a narrative for a business, what that looks like, how it reverberates through the company and through the company's mission, and how a narrative shifts over time, I think is really cool. You know, when you decide to change what the narrative will look like and how it's communicated, what are the channels that it has to go through and what does that shift or change look like? Also, like you, I'm super great that we can discuss how Deezer is creating a more sustainable future for artists. And I'm super excited for people to hear about their new UCPS initiative for sure.
For 1000%. So without any further ado, or actually with one quick further ado, if you don't already, be sure to check us out on Patreon. It's getting real popping in the Discord. We got some artists and managers that are making lots of progress, and I'm truly grateful to be part of just such a supportive community. We've got happy hours where we're able to dive into different hot takes and debates around various topics. So I want to encourage you guys to check it out. I'm super grateful for all the patrons so far. So check it out at musicbusinesspodcast.com/community. And now, actually, without further ado, Mr. Anton Gorman. Anton, how you doing today? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Doing good. Look forward to talking to you guys both about UCPS and Deezer and whatever comes up.
Likewise, man. No, very, very excited. Long time coming. For starters, just to lay some context, and I know we'll dive into a lot about Deezer and some of the really unique innovations that you're bringing to market with regards to stuff like UCPS. But even for starters, could you just speak a little bit about what exactly your role is and kind of what your day-to-day schedule and responsibilities look like?
Absolutely. So I'm the global comms director for Deezer. Our HQ is in Paris, France. I'm based in London, and my role is very simply to both drive our reputation, so increase our visibility in media and to tell our story more than anything else, and also to support the professionals that we have in all the countries. I've been in media for about roughly 15 years, so my whole career. And I think what I mean, I'm promoting Deezer obviously here, but what makes us stand apart in my eyes as a team is that we have some very, very strong professionals locally, and we let them have a lot of opportunity and responsibility. So my job is to give them the tools they need to succeed.
Awesome. And then just as a refresher for people who may not know, what's Deezer's mission, and what's the differentiating factor that you guys communicate to your audience?
So for those who don't know, we are a global audio streaming service. We have a catalog of 56 million tracks. That's music, podcasts, radio stations. I think what sets us apart is we're a much more human company, if you will. We're 500 people. We're all very passionate about music. And I'm sure we're not the only ones in the industry to do that. But we have a very strong editorial approach to audio streaming. So whilst we have a very different approach to how we do recommendation and algorithmic music, at the core of it is that we have a team of roughly 50 editors. are all experts in their local music, and they create playlists for our listeners and channels and content. So it's not only what an algorithm thinks. It's also there's a person there who actually loves the music and understands the local context and will create that content. And then when it comes to the automatic or algorithmic recommendation, we take an approach that it should be a lean back experience. You press one button and then you should have the music that you love, or, I should have the music that I love, instead of sifting through genres and topics, etc., which we also have for the record. But our kind of ideology has been centered around this thing that we call flow. So it's your musical flow. It takes into account all your genres. It takes into account a lot of different things within the algorithm, your favorites, things you don't like, as well as editorial recommendations, what people are listening to around you locally, and then tries to present you with an experience that's constantly morphs depending on what you do. So it's all of kind of everything baked in together. And when it works, it's awesome. It takes a little while, I would say, of engagement from the user to get the algorithm to know you well enough. And then when you have that Deezer moment, it's super cool.
That's awesome. So I know and I know the product continues to evolve, and I think even just speaking to some of those like algorithmic features and for music discovery, when you think about how the communication strategy has evolved, and you're about more or less 3 years since working with the company, what have been some of the most exciting kind of like evolutions, or as you think about, I mean, when you're in the early stages, what you were focused on communicating versus what you're really leaning into now, what have been some of the most exciting changes from your perspective?
I think for me, it's been an evolution of how we position ourselves in the industry. And I mean, everybody loves an underdog, and we're the quintessential underdog of the industry. If you take our competitors today, our main ones is Spotify, Apple, and Amazon. And we are a company of 500 people, mostly in Paris, who've built the product that competes. And in some cases, actually, is better. We have, and I think, for me, rather than just plugging the product, the way that the story, what I love is storytelling and how that all fits together, and seeing how the story evolves, is kind of a passion, a passion of mine. When I joined Deezer, we were talking a lot about flow, because the algorithmic discussion and discussion about AI recommendation and so on was much higher on the industry agenda, or was much a bigger part of the industry discourse than maybe it is today. And then over time, we've embraced our human element much, much more. The editorial, the fact that, the people who make up Deezer's, recommendations and content are all, professionals and have a strong passion for music. So that's where, what we talk about more, or how we kind of have adjusted our positioning. And then we've done some pretty cool things. And this is more of a, I'm a comms nerd. Simply, we've done some pretty cool nerdy stuff at Deezer on the comms side, which is not a music industry thing, right. Like our language, which taken a lot of work.
Awesome. Can you speak more about what building that story kind of looks like from the perspective of a company? I think, on our podcasts, we often talk about the story and building it around an artist, but not necessarily a company in the music industry. Kind of what is that process like? And if it ever changes, you kind of said the narrative has evolved. What is that process like, and how does that change reverberate through the rest of the company?
So I think you have to start. I mean, at the core, you have to start with. I mean, like everyone, you find out what the story actually is. So it's about involving the people from all over the business. So you have to involve the product guys, you have to involve the content guys, you have to involve the marketing guys, and sit down with them and understand what their priorities are and how that fits together. And then the way I've approached it is that and I do this every year, I build a kind of hierarchy of what's the most important thing that we want to convey for that year. And once I have that in my mind, then obviously then I put it down on paper, and then I go and validate it with the people in the business to make sure that we're on the right track. Because at least in my field in communication, some of the tweaks that you will want to make will be quite subtle, but they will over time have a big difference on how the company is perceived. So that's how the process works. I think on the flip side of that, and I'm not going to spend a long time on it, but the other side of it is that you also have to align what you measure then, of course, on the communication side to make sure that, what you do has an effect, which is the kind of the backside of the story building.
I just want to say I'm not a comms nerd, but I feel like the more you talk, you just are turning me into one. I'm super into your process, and I just think it's awesome to hear it. Yeah.
Thank you.
I particularly like too the idea of kind of like validating some of the different comms priorities within the team. I think it's very easy as organizations get bigger to operate in silos, and I'm definitely familiar with the idea of kind of like soliciting like customer feedback and customer development with actual like end customers, which I'm sure is also somewhat informing the strategy, but to take it to another level and actually kind of take that same approach to generating feedback and validation internally seems super valuable. With that said, I mean, go ahead, please.
I think you said something interesting. So with the validation internally and then looking at validation from your customers. So obviously we interact with customers all the time. Quite a few of us, I mean, maybe this is a Deezer thing because we're small, but quite a few of us are on Reddit, for example, as in not always, formally, but to give you an example, our chief data officer reads the Deezer forums every day. I'm on the Deezer forums every day. When I hear what our customers were telling us, I pass that on to the team. And I think a lot of the interesting things comes through in the anecdotes. Data is obviously important, but the anecdotes, and there was in this article by Jeff Bezos a while ago where he said, when data and anecdote conflict in terms of what customers are telling me, he trusts the anecdote because that will be indicative of the experience. And that kind of has stuck with me a lot. So I think on kind of getting input and that we do interact a lot. When it comes to media, I think sometimes you just have to also be patient. That's the biggest trick, that you build a story that has all of these different elements. And I would say it takes about 2 years for positioning. If you want to position a company or, as something, Deezer is, loves blueberries. From the time you've kind of realized that that is what you want to say to the time that everyone has always known that you've always loved blueberries, it's a 2-year process. And what happens in between often is that you have to defend people get bored much quicker because people are excited and passionate, but you have to kind of defend the stability of the messaging as well to get good results on the communication side.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. I love that. I mean, it seems, and I'm curious how that potentially ties into and has informed some of the developments and comm strategy with regards to UCPS. I know this is definitely a big priority and also a very valuable innovation when it comes to just creating a more equitable and kind of like fair landscape for all the different stakeholders involved within the music industry. For starters, do you think you could just kind of set the stage and explain what UCPS is and why you created it?
Absolutely, and thank you. So UCPS stands for User-centric Payment System because we're super bad at naming things. But ultimately, so let's start with the audio streaming industry. And it works in exactly the same way for everyone today, with the exception, there are a few very small players. But if you look at Spotify, Apple, Amazon, us, the way it works today is that if you pay for your subscription, you listen to whatever it is that you listen to that month. The way that ultimately payments are calculated, and obviously I'm simplifying, but ultimately is that you will take the market share of an artist across the whole platform for a given period of time. So say we take a month, the payments for January. You will take how much an artist has of all of the streams on the platform, and you will pay according to that market share. Now, what that means ultimately is that if you're a very, very big artist, you essentially get paid more, you get paid a higher proportion of the money for that month than you have had of the listening. So there's an incremental effect that tends to benefit the biggest players. And on the flip side of that, if you're a medium-sized artist, what tends to happen is that then the people who you are basically become disconnected in the current system from your fan base, because we all kind of think, and this is what we found very consistently, what people think happens is that if I only play Leonard Cohen, which I do some months actually, that all of the money from my, that I generate through my subscription will go to Leonard Cohen. And I don't mean all of the money that I pay, because obviously the platform takes some, etc. But the licensing fee that I contribute doesn't actually go to the artists that I listen to. And that's the fundamental problem. So what we started talking about this, I think, 3-4 years ago. What seems to be much more fair is that the money that you pay as a listener should support the artists that you actually enjoy. Right? And I think the irony is that everyone I speak to who doesn't understand the music industry in depth thinks that it's already works that way. And they get very surprised when they realize that that's not actually the case. And to give you guys just an anecdote, we created this tool at Deezer where Deezer users could plug in their account, and then they could see how much of the royalties that they pay go to artists that they actually listen to. And looking at my colleagues and myself, like a typical month for me would be that 85% of my royalties went to artists I had never played. Which sounds, it kind of stops there ultimately, because it just doesn't make any sense, and it shouldn't make any sense. It's as if, what you like is Timberland, but what your money goes to is Nike. So basically, we started looking into this. We started running the numbers and seeing, what the impact would be. And where we are now is that we very, very publicly champion the idea of having a user-centric approach for royalty payments. And just as a last kind of closing statement, so ultimately, what user-centric means is that instead of looking at the market share of an artist across the whole platform, you look at the market share of an artist in the listening of each individual user. So if you only listen to Drake, all of your money should go to Drake. We don't care. We don't have a view on which artist should get paid. We just want to make sure that you, Sam, when you listen to music, your money goes to the artist that you enjoy. And it's that at the core.
Most of the people that I would know think that's how streaming services already work. I think you're correct in that approach. To confirm, if I listen to Drake 50% of the time and I listen to Sam 50% of the time because he comes out with new music or something, then 50% of whatever I stream in terms of my paid royalties go to Sam, right?
Well, they should, but they don't today.
Yeah, right.
That's the point.
Yeah, right. So I guess what's the next step after this? What are you guys doing to make this, I guess, more widespread?
So we started, like I said, with running the numbers and talking to the labels, because of course, in order to implement this, we have to have the rights holders on board. We can't do it unilaterally, and no one can. So we've provided a lot of data to rights holders so that they can analyze the impact on Deezer and see where we're coming from. We've provided some data publicly, and we've been slowly, I would say, building the case and kind of educating the media and kind of educating the people we can reach about the benefits of a user-centric approach and why it matters.
Yeah, awesome. I love it too, because I also, people will say in passing that there's no middle class in the music industry. You're either a broke, starving artist or at the top of the game. And I think it's programs and systems like this that will really enable that kind of middle tier of artists that might not necessarily have this dominant market share, but should be receiving a more equitable kind of compensation for the fans that they've created and the community around them.
And that's exactly the point. But it's also another point. The dynamics that we have on the platform is that young people have more time and therefore stream more, which also means that because of the market share based approach, young people basically decide who gets paid by streaming today. So if your fan base is, say, 18 to 24, very roughly, you're having a great time. The problem, of course, is that everyone ages and their fan base tends to age with them. There's very few artists who, when they're 60, have a fan base of 20. I mean, to some extent, but most of it, which means that as a musician, you have in the current environment, you have a diminishing return from your fans, while at the same time, if you play concerts and if you as you go through your career as a musician, you will see people who've been following you for years. who've been coming to your concerts, who've been listening to your music, whatever, every day, every year. And ultimately, a user-centric approach also means that there's the long tail for artists becomes better. So you can actually have, it's also a career planning element to this. That if you're big today, if we start a band and we're super successful this year, in 10 years, no one will have remembered us, except for the fans who grew up with us on our journey. And those people will probably still be listening to our music. The problem today is that it doesn't matter that they listen because we're not actually getting paid for it proportionally. So that connection is also part of it. But like you say, Sam, what our data has indicated is that there's an adjustment at the top that tends to benefit then kind of a wider band, let's say, of musicians.
That's amazing. I like it, and I'm excited to see that hopefully become the norm in the industry. I think it's a much fairer means of compensation, and I know there's a lot of, just generally speaking, a lot of talk in the industry right now around fairness in compensation.
Also, like, imagine if whenever people did shows, imagine whenever people did concerts, you bought a ticket and it went to some large pot of Live Nation shows and then was paid out market share. I think people would be like, what? They'd be super confused. So why isn't it like that with streaming? Like I'm comparing this to some or merchandise. If a merchandise company, if an owner has several different clients, and then every time money comes in, it goes to one big pot of merchandise for all of their clients, and then it's split via market share. That doesn't like make sense,
Doesn't make sense from the consumer side, but I could see it on the other side because at the end of the day, they do just want to kind of nurture the relationships with the biggest cash cows,
right?
From a kind of vendor supplier side. So I can see the incentive and how the incentive of the supplier and the platforms, if you will, might not necessarily be directly tied to that of the consumer. So this seems very much like the name implies, much more user-centric. So I like it.
Right.
But I think also, guys, just remember that 1% off the top is much more than 1%, up in the middle. There's a disproportionate impact. 0.5% of the top 10 is like 3 or 4 or 5%, additional in the middle. And it goes across genres as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's exciting. So when it comes to, from your perspective, from the communication strategy, can you kind of put this into context? As this is a very valuable innovation that Deezer has brought to market, is kind of pioneering within the industry, is trying to create a new standard within the industry, with your objective of communicating that positioning, of making that known within the industry and trying to evangelize it. Can you speak tactically to how you've gone about doing that with regards to UCPS?
I think it's, much less mysterious probably than I would have loved to make it, but we started promoting the idea at in the industry, at the industry events. We of course talked behind closed doors as well. We launched a public campaign last year, so we developed a web tool, like I mentioned, to let the users have the experience, to at least show them what it means. And then we've been talking as part of Deezer's story. We've been talking to media about the user-centric approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the one thing I would just like to mention here that's important, to highlight that a switch from the current system to user-centric doesn't benefit Deezer financially. We pay about 70% of our revenues directly in royalties, and that will still be the case, no matter what the system is. So for us, it really is about fairness, because I think, you've all seen the eternal conversation about artist payments, which always, guys, boils down to, is it, 0.113 or is it 0.112 for this provider? Should it be 1 cent per stream? I just saw today there's this Justice at Spotify campaign from the Union of Musicians and Allied Workers in the US, right? And the first thing they lead with is the payments per stream, where in fact the system isn't built around that. Yes, you can calculate it at the back end, but what actually happens when the payments are calculated is a totally different thing. But what we're seeing, and I think this is the interesting thing, so whilst the media conversation was only payments per stream, 3 years ago. Now it's more and more about actual fairness and equity in the industry. And user-centric is a big part of that. So recently we had artists in Germany who were, talking about these streaming economics. But part of the conversation was that to more and more artists, when they understand how it works, it makes sense to switch to a user-centric approach because it is more fair and it's connected to your actual performance in a much more direct way. We then had the Broken Record campaign, which was a industry-led initiative in the UK, which also looked at the dynamics of the industry. But user-centric just naturally becomes part of the conversation. If you're looking at how people make a living from streaming, especially this year, so no one's playing any gigs, merchandising. I don't have a direct any visibility on it, but I'm guessing it's much less as well because people will buy that at gigs. So streaming economics suddenly is a big thing. And we're seeing on a political level, we're seeing, some very, very early stages of kind of a growing understanding, that this is a topic that should be looked into. Of course, it's very complex, but I think for us, it's been the strategy overall has been just to, both be very vocal and to promote this as part of what we want to achieve.
Very noble too. I appreciate it. I think it's dope. So when you're communicating, whether that's UCPS, a new feature, or generally starting a campaign via comms, what are some of the core elements of a successful comm strategy, and how do you end up quantifying success when you start a campaign and when the campaign is over?
I think for us it's about relevance. So, you have to target, if you will, the media that will actually be interested in the story, because people are overwhelmed by a bunch of, by company information and other people reaching out. So it has to be relevant. I think it's important to keep it simple, which is just a firm belief of mine that the way that companies communicate hasn't evolved, at least, for sure, it has barely evolved in my career, which has been the last 15 years. Which means that, your language and stuff like that, there's plenty of things that I think communicators can and should learn from marketing, from CRM, like customer engagement, to actually talk to people as if they're people. Like we're not some kind of formal, we're not a bunch of 150-year-old people wearing powdered wigs. Because ultimately everyone is busy and everyone is lazy. And I mean that in the best possible sense. So you have to be relevant and you have to help them do their job as part of your communication strategy. So I think within that, it's, the simplicity. And then the last element is consistency. You can't be changing things all the time. You have to consistently pursue, your positioning over an extended period of time for it to be successful.
Right.
And it's not that because otherwise it's just going to be nothing. You have to build a foundation, or you build your identity. Because if you change it too much, it's not like when you're a teenager. If you try out too many things, if you're a goth one day and then you're a, a jock the next, people will just assume that your identity is all about trying things. You're not actually communicating anything. It's the same when you build a story. And I think on the measurement side of it, Jordan, to follow up on that, we obviously measure the coverage for everything we do. So for each individual engagement tactically, we will see what the outcomes were, both in terms of quantity and in terms of quality. We will research the relevant media to target before each engagement. So it's never random and it's never based on some kind of mass list, because less ultimately is more. And we've been very, very successful with that strategy over the last 2 years. On the comms indicators, we've had fantastic growth. We had really good growth this year as well. Just based on the fact that we protect our audience, sometimes from our kind of desire to tell them everything. Because ultimately, what people are interested in is kind of the things, themselves and the things that they are interested in, not in what we're doing. And I think on the comm strategy side, that's another, that is a fundamental belief I have as a communicator. like what most people want to know about is how is this relevant for me right now? Which means that, and if we as a company, if we talk about what we're doing, honestly, no one cares, because every company is doing things every day and no one cares. So it has to start with, with an actual human connection between what annoys you today and how that connects to that issue, and then try to find the right people who actually have that issue rather than something else.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So in that same vein, I mean, trying to find the people that have the issue, you spoke to trying to create relevance and find where there's the most relevance with regards to different like channels and comms partners. When you think about the different channels involved in a modern comm strategy, I know you've got some element of traditional media, there's conferences, there's digital media, there's the music business podcast. Can you think about or speak to what, from your perspective, are some of the core and most effective channels? And then how do you really go about evaluating between channels?
I think, and then maybe this will be controversial. I think it's actually, everyone talks about, selecting carefully. The truth is, if you're doing PR, it's all about the media as a starting point. Now, where those people are, that's a different thing, like how you approach them and how you find them. Twitter, is an important tool just to, to find and connect to journalists, and that is the case today. Obviously, when I started working, our bosses still tried to get us just to fax things. Which just sounds absolutely ridiculous today. But ultimately, things will be done. Things will be done on email. I think we were also small enough that we can have a very direct connection to our audience. Even that audience are journalists and media. We are not faceless. There's not a big distribution platform that distributes things. So we have the luxury of just, being, we do our research and then we reach out to people in a much more direct way with always the person behind the message. And I think that it's a luxury. If we were, bigger and listed, we would have had to have a different approach. I think depending on the audience, you would of course adjust it. So just to give you guys an idea, we do a lot of things in dance music. We have a lot of people at Deezer actually are super passionate about dance. We've done a lot of dance music initiatives. We sponsor ADE in the Netherlands every year. We've done kind of a DJ mixtape project where we innovated how people get paid for the music that goes into a mix, which no one had done in that way before. And then, in dance music, the communities are very important, for example. So there, we will try to connect to the communities. So again, the forums, depending on what's relevant, things like Reddit's dance music scene, again, is a complement to the traditional media outreach. And then, I think as part of your strategy, the other part of it is the relationship building that happens behind the scenes, where you have to start that conversation. You have to find out what people actually care about, in their job as a journalist, so that you don't spam them with shit that they don't care about. But I think, a lot of the time people want to make this sound really mystical and complicated. There's this strategy, and selective targeting. It's just like with exercise. You have to have a very, very solid foundation on the basics, which is the media outreach, relationship building, and relevance, and then to measure that, and everything else becomes kind of opportunistic at the time.
Awesome. So I guess it's like as we wrap this up, what are some next steps that you're looking forward to, in addition to things like UCPS and general features or products that may be on the horizon that you can speak to, that you're looking forward to pushing and promoting? And obviously, you don't have to say anything that you're not supposed to talk about. I'm not saying like give us the tea on stuff that you are not supposed to talk about. So I wanted to preface it with things that maybe you're actively promoting right now that may not be in the full swing of their campaign.
I think to be honest, it's a tricky question to answer, because we constantly develop the product. Like anyone. Based on user feedback and based on what people actually want, want from it. we engage with people. I mean, we have a community online, and we take a lot of feedback from that, which sometimes, which guides some of our features. So, for example, one of the things, I mean, the way that Deezer has looked traditionally has been we've had a white background. So we've been very different from, the Green Giant and the Fruit people. It's been like a really, really nicely arranged, simple interface based on white. But our community actually wants the dark mode. So then, we developed the dark mode that allows you to switch between light and dark. We recently launched a feature that allows you to switch your kind of front page to a different country. So if you want to see what's being recommended to people in, Ecuador or Brazil or Belgium, you can actually just go into the service and just switch that. I mean, on the coming stuff, it's trickier to, it's trickier to say. We tend to work, we do a number of kind of bigger communications campaigns around, different topics, but I'm not going to tell you guys what it is or when it's coming necessarily. Sorry.
Yeah, no, all good. All good.
There's, and I know it's towards we're getting towards the end of the year. So we have the top lists and all of that stuff. So we are looking to come up with things, for our users as well, like everyone, to make it, more special.
That's amazing. Well, I think it's exciting to see you guys continue to push boundaries and innovate from the user experience, from the music and rights holder experience and the payment side. So, and then ultimately too from the comm side, and just making sure that you're able to effectively evangelize these different developments, bring them to market. So really do appreciate you coming on, Anton, and all the work that you do. I think it's still very excited to see what's in store in the next couple of years, besides what you were just able to share right now.
Yeah.
No, look, thank you very much. It's really is a pleasure to do, to talk to you guys and to, to just, to share a little bit how we do things, but also, the user-centric, we all are very passionate about it, not only as part of our job, because we love music. And I think this was a remarkably level description of what user-centric is, because I can sometimes get a little bit carried away. But look, thank you very much. It's been really a pleasure to be here. And for all of you listeners, check out Deezer. It works in a slightly different way. Once you're used to it, it's pretty cool.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Anton. Take it easy, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yo, that was a great episode. It's funny, we said in the episode that, or at least I said that I wasn't a communications nerd, but I was becoming one. I truly felt like that throughout the episode, just in terms of crafting a narrative for a business and what that process looks like, and also how he does it. I think it was just super interesting and super illuminating for multiple reasons. I think you can learn from it, not only if you're a business, but if you're an artist. Just the way that he thinks about communicating that vision to his audience, I think, is translatable to a lot of different spheres in music and, throughout. So I'm super glad that we got him on for sure. What'd you think, Sam?
Yeah, I thought it was great. I mean, Deezer's fighting the good fight against a lot of incumbents and major companies, and I think they're able to stay in there and set themselves up to succeed, thanks largely in part to innovating on the product, innovating in their communication strategy, and just bringing a lot of very valuable products and offerings to the market. So I think hearing how Anton approaches that from a communication standpoint was really, really fascinating, and genuinely, as a music fan, really excited to see how Deezer continues to evolve and grow in the years to come.
Absolutely.
So we love y'all. You know what it is. Another week, another episode in the bag. We'll see you next week. One Love, Music Business Podcast. We out.